Coming up in this special edition of the ICT Newscast, we talk one-on-one with today's Indigenous changemakers as they share their thoughts, dreams, and insights. That's next on the ICT Newscast.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.
Support for the ICT Newscast with Aaliyah Chavez comes from the Arizona PBS studios in Phoenix at the Walter Cronkite School of Journalism and Mass Communications at Arizona State University.
Amadawa Hopa. Thank you for joining us. I am Aaliyah Chavez. In the coming decades, Indigenous communities will likely look much different than right now. In the series called Indigenous in 2024, we talk with today's changemakers about their reflections, observations, and hopes, beginning with photographer Shannon Carr-Stevens. Shannon, I want to start off with talking about an aha moment that you had, and that was a conversation with a coworker. So tell us about that moment.
I was working, I previously worked for our public safety department at Laguna Pueblo, and I was having a conversation with one of my coworkers, and he was talking about, it was either a photography exhibit or a photography gallery that he had recently been to. And he was, so he was telling me about it, and as he was telling me about it, photography is something I've done since I was probably in 4th, 5th grade, and as he was, he was telling me about this exhibit, I started thinking how much I missed doing photography, taking photographs, and so there was something that really just stirred up in me that I had had a 35 millimeter camera all the way through high school and just took all my allowance went to film, negatives, developing, and then I after high school went to college, and in college I took a couple of years of photography classes, and then after college got married, family kicked in, and then I just for probably about 10 maybe 15 years I just didn't do here and there little some photographs. But then after that conversation I was like, that I want to get back to that. I want to get back to that. And so I was moving from film to digital. Everything was digital at that point. Got a new digital camera, started looking at lighting, started taking classes, started going to photography conferences, reading books. I mean, I dove in head first with this, and I just absolutely, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to do is photograph, particularly our Native people. There was, Edward Curtis, you see his photos, and they're very somber, but that's one side of us. There's a whole other side of us that's laughter, that's about family, that's about finding joy in dark places. That's what I've been moving my photography towards. But that was my aha moment, was that when I heard him talking about, this wonderful gallery, I thought, I want to do that. I want to see my work up there at some point. So that's what that was.
It really sounds like you're an example of somebody who at any age was like, this is my passion, and I'm going to do what it takes to make my dreams come true.
I stubborn, probably mostly stubborn. I just, my dad bought me a 35 millimeter camera when I was in 6th grade, and that was a pretty hefty camera for a kid. But I had more photos than the yearbook committee. I had that camera. I still have that camera today, and so I would do this for free all day long. I love recording people, particularly our Native people. That's just something just love doing.
This series is called Indigenous in 2024, and I want to ask you, as a photographer and as a storyteller, what you're observing right now that is the single greatest issue impacting Indigenous communities?
Our lifestyle, our health, our own health. We've moved into where it's a lot of processed food. It's just a lot of processed food, and I think that has just a tremendous tremendous impact on our own health. And it's the us as Native people getting back to where we were. I mean, we had a lot of farms, we had a lot of fields. There was a lot of, when I was growing up, my dad, my grandfather, they were sheep herders. A lot of, our own, and that's all they ate. That's what they ate. But now it's, and now it's just, it's real heavy on refined foods. And I think that's, and that impacts our health, that impacts our well-being, that impacts the quality of our life.
Yeah.
And I would, and so I would love to see a resurgence in the Native people going back to farming, going back, and even if it's a small, I mean, you don't have to flip overnight, but even a small portion of it, your own garden at home, growing your own foods.
Let me ask you the flip side of that question, and it is, what is the single greatest strength of Indigenous people in this day and age?
I think it's our humor that, I mean, we've seen all the way, through history. We've seen I guess, if the traumatic events that have happened to just Indigenous people here, and yet the humor that comes out of, I mean, you can go through really tough situations, really bad situations, and we could still find something to laugh about.
I want to squeeze in another question. We were talking earlier about senior centers and senior centers in your community of Laguna, and one very nearby in Acoma.
Yes.
Tell us what you're doing at those senior centers.
It started weighing on me that a lot of our elders, our Native elders, they don't have really nice portraits of themselves, and they're not there's a lot of studios, like, so I'm in Laguna Pueblo and Albuquerque, there's a lot of photography studios, but Natives are not comfortable going into those studios outside of home. They're comfortable at home. So I thought, well, why not? I have the backdrops and camera and everything. So I started talking with our local senior center and asking her, do you mind if I set up one day? I said, you 50 and over, elder, I said, or if you just feel old, come by. I'll take your picture, and no charge. I'll set up everything. I'll take your photo, no charge, and then I can get you digital prints for your families. I started at Laguna, and then I got a hold of the police chief at Acoma, and he's come up, well, I'll find you a place. And so I'm getting inquiries from other pueblos, Santa Ana, Isleta, Jemez. So I'm really looking to expand this because our elder Natives were, especially after COVID, we're just losing them at a high rate, and they should have a really nice portrait of themselves, and I can do that. And so in between my other photography jobs, that's really what I want to do.
Well, speaking of core values, honoring and loving our elders is something that is universal across Indigenous communities. So it's really wonderful that you're doing that work.
Thank you.
Shannon, I thank you so much for your time today.
Thank you. It's nice being here.
The Jemez Pueblo potter Kathleen Wall shares with us how our stories and songs can continue to preserve our culture into the future. Kathleen Wall, we thank you so much for joining the ICT Newscast today.
Thank you for having me.
So tell us about these really beautiful figures that you brought with you to the studio today.
Well, these are Pueblo pottery. When I was a child, I learned to make Pueblo pottery by my aunts and my mother, primarily my mother. And so these are a rendition of the Pueblo singers. And in our community, we have a very active singing culture. And so I just wanted to pay homage to that. And I just feel like it's a good way to honor not only the songs we have and the culture we have, but their ability to carry on language, because through the songs we get to hear stories, and we get to hear directions and different ways of being, basically, in each song that somebody writes.
You know, what's really powerful to me about your statement is that you're telling stories through your art. And I want to ask you, as a storyteller, what the single most pressing issue is for Indigenous people in this day and age that you're observing?
Well, you know, Indian country is so vast, and there's so many people affected on different demographic levels, economic levels, because we have urban Indians, we have reservation Indians, just rural allotment natives as well. But I think that there's one thing that we all have in common, and that is the blood quantum, and how tribes keep track of that blood quantum through CIB programs. I think, or I feel as though it's detrimental to our communities to have not only a stigma of not being a full-blood Indian, but not belonging to a certain tribe. I think there's, the CIB system allows for bias and animosities towards just mixed cultures and mixed native cultures. And that for me, I feel as though we would be better off if we encouraged our leaders to think of ways to solve the problem. I mean, I know, like, let's see, Red Lake, Chippewa, they just recently upped their blood quantum to where more people were accepted, and or just looking to the future. I mean, this is one thing we have to think of, is looking at our grandchildren and our great-grandchildren and where Native country and Native people will be in the future.
I want to ask you the flip side of that question, because I think when you're a Native person, it's really in our nature to come from a place of abundance. And something we have a lot of in this day and age is joy and humor and laughter. But I want to ask you the flip side of what is the greatest strength of Indigenous people in 2024?
Well, there's a lot of strength, but I brought these pieces primarily because I wanted to highlight language and culture. And that's one thing that I am inspired by all the time. I'm inspired by my community and their ability to speak fluently all the time. And also the songs, you know, the songs keep us all going. We all, so many Pueblo people partake in dancing. And these particular men that sing songs keep the culture alive, and they keep our spirits going. I mean, I don't know if you remember, but you know, when you're dancing in the plaza, Pueblo people, we dance in the plaza, and sometimes it's so tiring. And you know, when you start passing by the drum and the singers, something just awakens you. And I know this is true for every Native out there. As soon as they hear that drum, it just awakens something so beautiful and so, I think, connected to every other Native. And I think that's a strength.
Something that I really love, especially you mentioned the singers in the plaza, is when the drummers, they have babies, and they'll be really small babies, and they'll be holding them as they're singing. And I think it's really beautiful that that's a way for future generations to be connected quite literally as a newborn or a 2-month-old, 4-month-old.
You're right. That's why I made the youngest boy in the middle, because there's always young boys partaking with their uncles and fathers and just going up, and they're always welcome. You know, that's the thing about the drum groups across the United States, across the Indian country, and also the drum groups and singing groups in Pueblo country that, you know, it's always welcome to all the boys to come and join and learn the language and learn the songs.
I want to talk about teachers because teachers are so vital in every part of everyone's life. So tell us who taught you this craft and how it's grown so much in the time since you started.
Well, my mother taught me. I was one of these kids that just sat at the kitchen table with her while she was making pottery. And so it's not so much a lesson. It's not so much, I'm going to teach you this and I'm going to teach you that. It's just an absorption. You know, Pueblo kids, we kind of just absorb the Pueblo pottery from our mothers and the surroundings, because a lot of times your mother will be working with her auntie. And so that's where I became very close to my aunts and very close to my mom. And we still work together. In fact, working on these particular pieces, my mom came and sat with me and we just visited. And it's a really special time.
Yeah. You not only dig your own clay to make these really beautiful pieces, but you also harvest your own paints. I imagine that you spend so much time alone with your thoughts and with yourself. What are some of the greatest lessons that you've learned about yourself in all of the time that you spend making these really beautiful creations?
That's a great question. It takes you back to the clay, because so many pieces I make aren't highlighted that they're traditional clay. And the clay has so many lessons. And I think the first and foremost lesson that clay teaches you is patience, because so many times it wants to do what it wants to do. Like, it wants to dry at a certain rate in the summer where you cannot control it. And then in the winter, it doesn't want to dry at all. So, I mean, I think it teaches you that you have to be patient with everything around you. Hard work, of course, because digging clay and foraging for paints is hard work. In fact, it's very hard for me to find black anymore. After my aunties passed from Cochiti, she used to give me black paint, and now I purchased my black paint from the store because I can't find any. And that's one thing that, you know, I feel as though that it's okay as long as we're making art. There's always going to be things that we can't find in our culture, and there's always going to be things that are untangible. But as long as we keep working and we keep, you know, expressing ourselves in our given talents and our given mediums, I think it's okay.
Well, Kathleen, I've really enjoyed this conversation. Thank you so much for being with us.
You're welcome.
The First Peoples Fund new president and CEO Justin Heineman joins our conversation, focusing on maintaining the essence of who we are through language. Justin, thank you so much for joining us today on the ICT Newscast.
Well, thank you for having me. It's an honor.
I want to jump right in here because you're in a new role at First Peoples Fund. So tell us a little bit about the journey that brought you here.
Yeah, today is exciting for me in my own personal journey. I'm now the new president and CEO of the First Peoples Fund. So thanks for having me on my inaugural day. But I've been working in Indian country for quite a while. It's a lifelong journey, as you can understand. And so I've held a commitment to ensuring and helping our peoples in whatever capacity to thrive, to sustain their ways. And so this is just really a continuation, particularly through a passion of mine, which is Indigenous arts. So it's an honor to be here, and thank you.
First Peoples Fund operates so many different arms. Like, you quite literally have your hands dipped in so many things. So at a high level, tell us a little bit about operations and kind of what it looks like.
Yeah, well, First Peoples Fund is a national organization, but we also have some pretty strong local roots in the Plains area of Pine Ridge, South Dakota, and the other Lakota nations there. And so we grew out of Rapid City in the Pine Ridge area, but now we also have programming all over the country. Our roots are in what we call supporting cultural bearers through our Community Spirit Awards. Those are recognizing people who really carry on ancient and traditional ways of knowledge and doing through the arts. But now we're also in this modern day, and so we're supporting artists through fellowships and other types of business and entrepreneurial training. We're also supporting other Indigenous nonprofit organizations, and now the newest one, which is now a little over a year old, is we actually have a physical space called the Oglala Lakota Art Space in Pine Ridge, South Dakota, where we're doing art classes of all sorts, and we're also doing internships and fellowships and all the like. So we're dabbling in actual programmatic elements on the ground to national work and advocacy still. So.
This series that you're a part of with us today is called Indigenous in 2024, and I want to ask you, in the observations that you've had and the work that you do, what the single most pressing issue is for Indigenous people in this day and age?
Wow, that's a big question. The singular most. Well, to be fair, I don't know if I could actually just say singular, because I think what is pressing Indigenous peoples may vary based on where they're located, what their priorities are. It could be an environmental issue. Those in some places are the pressing issue. It may be the loss of language or culture. That may be the pressing issue of that. I can even say maybe enrollment. That is a modern day issue that a lot of people and tribes are facing, is this idea of enrollment, and what do we do with this notion of being pedigreed, if you will. And so I know people are wrestling with that issue. But for me, I think as a father of 4 children, a mother who is a fluent speaker, myself, who am no longer fluent. I grew up with it, and I've lost my language in many ways, or at least the fluency element, and then seeing my kids have less. That to me is a really a big concern for me personally, and I think many can relate to that, is just the ongoing challenge of retaining who we are in terms of our tribes, our Indigenous teachings and life ways through our language and culture. And it's the essence of who we are. And so for me, when you start to see some of the statistics and things of the language could be lost by this many years in certain communities and places, and the loss of many of our elders who are still speaking those languages, that concerns me.
I want to ask you the flip side of that question, and that's what the single greatest strength of Indigenous people is right now.
Yeah, well, maybe I did answer that for myself. I do think it is in our ancestral knowledge and teachings and life ways that have been passed on for generations, rooted in the language. And I say that with all due respect. I think that our greatest strengths are who we are, rooted in our languages and practices, and that from there so much stems. Everything that we do and who we are comes from that. And yes, I don't want to not say that where we come from in terms of actual land base is very critical in those things, but at the end, it's that who we are through our language and culture. And even just saying that now, then I have words pop into my head like our relationships, that, and how we treat each other, and so whether you're, I'm Navajo and I meet someone from Alaska, there's a relationship. And so but it's still, that relationship is probably because we value the idea of who we are in relation to others, other people, other places, our place in the universe. It's just a beautiful thing that I think we have that is so critical today. And so I love that you said, what is our greatest strength? And that element, that idea is so transcendent that I think, our world, not just our nation, our world needs and hungers for this idea of who we are. So, that place of belonging and things. And so I just love the fact that the world has so many Indigenous communities all over, and we're probably all rooted to that idea of language, culture, life ways. That's our strength.
You know, a lot of the core values that you're bringing up are sort of the reason that First Peoples Fund got its start to begin with. This idea of making sure that culture bearers exist in the future. In your role, what goals do you have, and what do you ultimately hope that you're leaving for the next generation?
Yeah, thank you. Well, first I have to acknowledge and obviously honor individuals who went before me, particularly Lori Poirier, the founding president and CEO, who blessed me with bringing me on board and allowed me to, I don't even want to say fill her shoes. That is not at all. I can never do that. But recognizing that so many worked hard to create a place and space that recognizes and honors cultural bearers, artists, Indigenous artists, and just the importance that that has in community. And so my goal in the short is, one, don't mess it up, right? Don't mess it up. And to continue that legacy that has been set before me. And so to continue to honor, lift up artists, Indigenous artists and culture bearers, particularly in places that maybe doesn't get the recognition, doesn't have the resources financially, et cetera, and to continue to do that. As you know, there's just so much is happening in this space of creatives, Indigenous creatives. That's exciting, yet there are still a lot of folks that do not have the access to certain things, whether it's resources, training, markets, all of that. So that's our ongoing job, is to continue to work to provide that. And then in the future, I think, we're experiencing a little bit of it right now. We're now going to be entering into a space of how to support performing artists. That's new for us. We also are engaged in how to support Indigenous musicians. So just like anything else, we're expanding from the visual arts to music to performing arts, and having to learn and understand what does it mean to support those folks that are doing amazing things. So it's definitely an evolution for us, a learning journey. So I'm excited to just see what comes.
I am too. Justin, thank you so much for your time today.
Absolutely, thank you.
For more on this series, visit ictnews.org. From all of us in the newsroom, stay safe, my relatives.
This program is made possible by the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, a private corporation funded by the American people.